guys, we are back and I am here. This is photography video number 4. And this time we are talking about the third option in the trifecta, which is the ISO, International Standards Organization. Again, that's not very important for you to know, but if you like to know more about it, feel free to search it and learn more about it. But what's this ISO thing all about? You've already learned what is the distance of focus. You already learned how fast it could possibly move. You've learned how to deal with these two things. But the last one we need is the ISO. And what's the question are we asking with the ISO? I need to be able to see. You want to know what's going on. Because in a nutshell, the issue with ISO is its sensitivity to the amount of light coming in. Because the actual light is a crispy, clean, smooth photo that you have taken. The ISO number is low. But when you have to punch that number up, you're able to see what's going on now. You're gaining light. You're getting the ability to make the picture brighter. But there's a huge cost that comes with that, which is how grainy the photo looks. Just imagine if you're looking at a photo with all these colors, but each color you can see it as fine as a grain of sand. As the ISO gets worse, you're not able to make out things. Like if you're taking pictures of something like a book with words on it, the words will become so grainy that they'll become kind of mushy together, depending on the camera you're using. The better your camera can handle the ISO, it may have that grainy look, but the picture still may be clear enough to see. So, I have something down here to be able to use it as an example. It actually has some words on it. So what I'm going to do is, and I'll show you guys the photo, I'm going to try and do something that has fairly low ISO. We got some numbers here. Back in the day when they did film, they had cans of film. And you can buy the cans of film based on the ISO and the sensitivity to light you wanted. So the cans would say 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. And depending on how dark the location was, you had to choose the proper film to go inside the camera so it could expose to help you out with the amount of light that you actually needed. So that's the connection to now. So just like in the aperture, as you moved up, the numbers doubled or cut in half, what we call stops of light. Do you remember that back in video 2 with aperture? When you went from 16 to 11, that's called a stop. Or from 11 to 8, that's called a stop. A lot of cameras now can do increments of stops. So maybe on your way from 1.8 to 2.8, you might be able to get 2.0, 2.5, and then 2.8. Those are fractions of light. But in general, what you want to be able to do is determine what stops of light are by memorizing the stops, which is usually simple enough math. The aperture you got to get used to, but the shutter speed and the ISO are fairly, straightforward. If you want to double the light in the ISO, you go from 100 to 200, then 200 to 400, 400 to 800, and these are stops. If you want increments of a stop, which you have the option to leave on or off in your camera, you may get 100, 125, 160, and then 200. So you get kind of this 1/3 or a quarter of the light kind of thing that you're able to do. But in general, every time you double the number or cut the number in half, you're moving what we like to call a stop. Give yourself a couple of, okay, so you're at ISO 100. Open up a couple of stops of light. You'll go from 100 to 200 to 400 because couple 2, you're going to go from 100 to the next stop, which is 200, doubles the light, and then we're going to triple the amount of light by moving to 400. Okay? So these numbers make it simple to follow when you're bringing the light up and bringing the light down, trying to get the perfect exposure when you're taking the picture. When I say exposure, I mean the perfect amount of light when you look at the photo. It's vibrant, I see all the colors, I see as much detail in the photo as possible. If I take a picture in a park on a sunny day, is the sky flat white and I can see all the detail on the ground, so maybe it looks like I'm looking at a park in a void? Or can I see the grass, the trees, and the clouds in the sky and the blue colors? Can I see everything? Okay, that would be a perfect exposure when you can see everything with full detail. You have to mess with these 3 numbers to see if that's possible. In some cases, there's such a great distance between light and dark. Your camera can't see it all and you have to choose the middle ground or you have to pick one. If you leave something too bright, even if you take it into your computer, you might not be able to bring the details back by just lowering the brightness because you filled it up with so much light. It's what we call, it's blown out. It's too much light. You let too much light. These settings they're just not working together and you're getting too much light. Or they're not working together and it's just dark, it's too black, okay? So you're putting these together to get the perfect balance of light with the most detail in the photo. And sometimes you might find that, okay, I got the skies and the clouds, and the skies are blue. And then I got some trees and some grass. But on this side of the tree where the sun's not hitting it, it's pitch black and there's no detail there. Sometimes you might have just to, you got to go with the flow. That might be the situation you're in. You may perhaps need some type of flash from the outside hitting the shadowy spots to pick them up a little bit. But what we're talking about is, and this is a bit of a different situation, we're talking about the range that the camera has. How many stops apart can the camera pick up detail? The more stops apart, the more detail from light to dark the camera can see. And we call those out in stop ranges. So we may have a 12 stop latitude or 12 stop range. How can we calculate that? We have to look at these in numbers of 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if we go all the way to 12, it's saying that I can pick up light going across 12 different stops of light. But in life, the sun can come out and some light can be so bright versus the dark area, it covers over 20 stops. So you're just not going to be able to get the detail in both. So you might need to take the middle ground. You might need to keep the details in the bright parts, or you might need to keep the details in the dark parts, and you have to choose a happy medium. Okay? And what you're doing with these three is you're finding the happy medium. Okay? Now, I've got this here. I'm going to try and keep my shutter speed. Let me do a test shot first. Let's see where we at. That looks good. Okay. What it is I have my aperture pretty low so I can get a lot of light. So I'm going to try and take this photo as flat to the plane of focus as possible so things don't fall off. All right, we got that photo and you guys will be able to see it. Now, the ISO on that photo, this is 400. The 100, 200, and 400 are pretty good at leaving out the noise or the graininess that I was talking about. But now what I'm going to do is, and I got to count stops to get this correct. So I'm at 400. 800 is 1 stop. 1600 is 2. 3200 is 3. 6400 is 4. And then we have what we like to call the high setting. Some cameras can go 12,800. So at 6400, if you go up one, it'll say high, which is 12,800. If you can get 12,800, your high setting will be 25,000. And so on and so forth. The high setting means use this as a pretty much emergency option because the photo might be so grainy, it may or may not be usable. Okay? So now, I've got it on high. I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went up 5 stops. So I have to recover 5 stops in the camera. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now I'm going to take another shot of the can. And just to run a check on it, I'm going to zoom in. Oh yeah. And this lens is so sharp, it's not bad at all. But this is great. So you guys are definitely going to get to see what I mean. And the thing is, this is such a really good glass on this lens that you're going to see that when you have the proper glass and you have the proper camera, it can handle the noise a lot better, even though you can see the noise. But check out the pictures that I have posted up on the screen, right? And when you look at the pictures up on the screen, you're going to be able to see when I crop into them that one is really grainy and speckly looking. Might still be noticeable, which lets you know that your camera can handle the high ISOs better, which means when you set your shutter speed and you set your distance of focus, or how fast does it move versus what's the distance of focus, when you set these two, you might realize the photo's still too dark, and you might need to crank this baby all the way up on the ISO side. You're going to notice that with the grainier picture, if you have a really good camera that can handle that grain, or handle the noise is what we call it, then the photo is still going to be noticeably sharp where you need it to be, even though it has the speckly look. Okay? And the speckly look is only a problem when you print, because if your megapixels are really high, those specks are going to take a lot of zooming in for you to notice them. So there's some fundamentals across all three of these that you have to understand. The ISO when you're outside on a sunny day you want to have it set at 100 to start. Your shutter speed, you're going to want to have it set at 1 and 2/50th to start. If you can, you're going to want to have your aperture at 2.8 to start. Now, those are your general settings. And what I'm going to do, just so you guys can see it, I'm going to preset this camera to exactly those three, so you know what the, and every camera's settings on the back of the camera or in the camera look differently, but I'm showing you what it looks like for these. So we got our 100 ISO, we're going to get our 2.8 aperture, and we're going to get our 2/50th of a second shutter speed. And I'm going to use this to get the picture so you guys can actually see it. Well, I guess the first thing we should do is get our correct numbers back to where we should have them so the photo isn't speckly and grainy and you can see it pretty well. Alright, there we have it. Bring the screen back up, take a photo, and there we have it. So you guys will have the ability to see all three settings, as I said, in standard. And on the top, where the knob is on the top of the camera, which there'll probably be a knob on the cameras that you have, when we set it to the M, as in Mary setting, that's manual. And on manual, there's going to be buttons across the camera that controls each of these three. With this type of camera, which is the Canon 60D and the one that I have with the battery grip, the aperture is controlled with this wheel on the back, right? It's controlled with that. The shutter speed is controlled with right behind the button you press to take the photo. It's this wheel right here. If you have the battery grip, there's a second one for shutter speed right here. And if you want to be able to change the ISO, there is a button right on top of the camera where this screen is, which also shows you your settings, that says ISO. And what I'm going to do is, so you guys can see it, get a close-up picture of that. I'm going to hit the ISO button on there. Get me some focus going here. Let's hit the button. Yep. So, in summary, guys, the ISO is the need to be able to see. I set my shutter speed, I set my aperture, because maybe perhaps I have a photo where it's moving fast and I need a large distance of focus. Maybe that child in the second one I was talking about, the child who was jumping, who's moving really fast in a dark room, maybe I needed to get the shutter speed up to a larger fraction of a second. So a very quick flicker, which means I'm going to have less light. Okay, because remember, we preset our camera. We preset to ISO 100, which means when we take the photo, it's just smooth. It's not, it doesn't have the sandy, speckly look. So we're at the greatest setting we can have there. The shutter speed was standard 1 and 250, but the little girl was jumping around, so we had to raise that to like 1 and 1000. So from here, we lost light. From here, we started standard. From here, we lost light, but we're able to snap the photo a little faster to freeze it. Photo's still dark. Now I determined that the child is jumping, the family members are standing behind the child, smiling and laughing, and I need them in focus. So I need something like 5.6, 8, maybe even 11. I set those two, but when I take the photo, it's still black because it's like a candle lit room, or it's just lit by one small lamp. Enter the ISO. I start bumping the ISO number up to a point where the photo is lit correctly, where I can see what I need to see. Now, in all its glory, I can see the child frozen in midair because they're jumping, and there's all the family members smiling in the back, and they're all in a good enough focus where I can see them smiling and clapping and doing what they do, celebrating the child, because the aperture is set correct. It was too dark in the room, so I bumped up the ISO. So even though I have the photo looking the way I want, I had to push the ISO up. It's a little speckly, but I got the right glass, I got the right camera. It can handle the noise, and the look of the photo is just so cheery that the speckling doesn't bother anyone because it's such a good moment. That's what you call a scenario. Now, what do I want you guys to do? I want you to take your time. I want you to find two objects in the room, and I want you to run a test on your ability to do aperture. And then I want you to run a test on your ability to do shutter speed. And then I want you to find scenarios where perhaps you have to bump up the ISO. Or if you want, just for the sake of it, maybe you don't need to bump up the ISO. Find a way to set these settings so that the ISO gets higher, but everything can still be seen clearly in the photo. Start messing with how these numbers go together and use the simple increments to help you out. I already told you that you're starting off at ISO 100, shutter speed 1 and 2/50th. And if you have it, aperture 2.8. If you have the cheaper glass that comes with some of the consumer level lenses because you're just starting out, 5.6 is majority of lenses, which is considered slow glass, which is best for outside and very well lit interiors. If the interiors are not lit very well, just by having a 5.6 lens, you're going to have to bump up the ISO anyway indoors. Because in a lot of cases, even with a 2.8, the ISO has to be a little bit higher to get what it is you need. So that's just so you know. Having the faster glass, fast glass, remember, 2.8 and lower, the ability to drop down the distance of focus but gather more light is very important. So get into these scenarios where you have to first ask yourself the question. Go to a sports event and ask yourself the question, what's my first question? Well, it's a sport. The first question is probably how fast does it move? So I'm not setting the aperture first, I'm setting the shutter speed first. And I have to set the shutter speed to make the action freeze. So I'm going to set the shutter speed to make the action freeze. Okay, what if I got the shutter speed I think I need, but it's too dark, I can't see what I took a picture of? Just start dropping the aperture, meaning making the number lower. Then check it again. Keep the shutter speed the same that you think you want, but lower the aperture and see if you have enough light to at least see something to see if you're freezing the action. If you are freezing the action and you chose the correct shutter speed, and you've lowered the aperture enough to the point where you're not worried about distance of focus, you just need more light. Now you know to bump up the ISO to get the light where you need it to be. Okay, another scenario. It's a very bright day. Sun is out. You're on the beach. You're trying to get the aperture to 2.8. That could be a little tricky. It's very bright outside. So I have the ability to send the shutter speed skyward, moving it up. So more fractions of a second. I got a lot of light, right? But I want to be able to have the thing that I'm focusing on, like a person is standing in front of the water on the beach. But I don't want the water in focus. I want the person I'm taking a photo of in focus. So I already know I need the low aperture. I need the 2.8, the 1.8, the 1.4, the 1.2, and maybe the 4.0 if the person I'm taking the photo of is far enough from the thing behind them to blur it out anyway. Okay? So I got that set. I know that I want the one person in focus, nothing else. I got the shutter speed probably at 1 in 8,000, but man, it's still a little bright. What am I going to do next? Well, what if the ISO is all the way in the tank? It's at it's at the 100 mark. Okay, I can't take this any lower. So because when this number is lower, the ISO, we know it's less light, but the picture is really clean. It's smooth, it's not speckly. We can't move it up because we're going to add more light. It's going to blow the photo out. We're already maxed out at 1 in 8,000. And we already got the aperture at 2.8, which is where we want it because what we care about is distance of focus. So now there's really nothing more than I can do except bump the aperture up to see if I can get the number high enough to make the photo be in focus. But maybe it's pulling something behind them in focus I don't want in focus. What else can I do? Well, this is where we get into specialty things about cameras, which I will show you guys those videos later. So upon request, when you guys feel like you're ready, I'm going to be able to pull more of those out. And that's when we're going to start talking about special filters, the ability to use light, and other modifiers to help get the light where we need it to be. We'll learn tricks like, for instance, at nighttime when we shoot landscapes, how do we get streaks of light? What about fireworks? How do we get a clean fireworks shot? Those are the types of questions we're going to start to answer in specialty stuff. Special memory cards. We might even get the video. Who knows? All right, guys. So, you guys have learned the equipment you need. We've talked about the 3 major things in photography that you need when your camera is on the manual setting. And then you'll be able to put those 3 together to get the photos that you want. How? By asking yourself the first question before you even take the photo that's most important. How fast does it move? Or am I worried about the distance of focus? Or both? And based on what answer I get, once I make my settings, that will determine what I do with the ISO. All right, guys, I hope you got it. If you have any more questions, you can contact me at Marvin Burwell Photography on Instagram. You can contact me on Facebook at Marvin Burwell Photography. I'll catch you guys later.